This video is by Straight Goods News. Sgnews.ca.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, National Chief Sean, and friends and relatives. Again, as Regional Chief, responsibility with the portfolio holder for treaties and treaty implementation, we've brought together our elders and our spiritual people last number of days and treaty chiefs from across Turtle Island. And that was the biggest gathering to focus on this meeting upcoming. And we focused on three things that brought together our people. We held up and acknowledged the Idle No More movement, because that focused on Bill C-38 and Bill C-45, which had a negative impact on lands, resources, and waters in our territories and Mother Earth. So we acknowledged that. That brought things together. We acknowledge, as National Chief said, the people that are on that fast, and that spiritual fast. That's a movement. That's a spiritual thing there in itself. So we held them up because it brought our people together. Unifying rallies involving leadership across Turtle Island, we held that up. The elders, the youth, the women, leadership collectively together, bringing about transformational change. We see that happening. So as treaty leadership met, we talked about one of the most fundamental important relationships is the relationship with the Crown. And of course that sanctity of contract, the sacredness of that agreement. And so we talked about treaty implementation, treaty enforcement. That's that at a highest level to look at that now, because the treaties are about peaceful coexistence and sharing the lands and resources, not exploitation. Our treaties were not meant to make us poor in our own homelands, but that's what we see. And so you see that movement because our people were tired of the overcrowded and housing conditions that are there. They're tired of the high unemployment. They're tired of lands and resources being exploited with no involvement from Indigenous peoples. That's what you see happening. And so now, time for renewal of that relationship with the Crown. The integrity of the Crown has been tarnished many, many times. And so to renew that at a very high level with a commitment from the Prime Minister's office, Privy Council office, new institutions to look at treaty implementation, treaty enforcement. A long-term process, because we recognize the meeting on Friday is just one day. There has to be a high-level commitment ongoing. The second point we talked about is, again, lands and resources being unilaterally developed without our involvement creates poverty. That's not good for this country. We need to deal with that. Get Indigenous peoples involved now. And so we talked about resource revenue sharing, but at a high level, possibly led by one of the ministers involved with natural resources, Mr. Oliver, led by and facilitating meetings with the premiers across Canada. Ongoing processes. We talked about implementation, cabinet mandate for implementation of treaties and inherent rights. We talked about that. Three high-level commitments that we need to see. Fundamental change, transformational change. We've also talked about where we need to go in terms of dealing with a new fiscal relationship with the Crown, because we've talked about that cap that's been there for 19 years that does not keep up with inflation, that does not meet the needs of our people in our territories. It's not based on total population on and off the reserve. And so we talked about a new fiscal relationship with the Crown. That's important to see. Direction to review that. That's not acceptable because we're not even at the starting gate when it comes to fiscal relationships. That was talked about. And then now we need to focus even on some short-term things. We brought up even the missing murdered Aboriginal women in Canada, the call for that inquiry. So these things we've talked about because there's so much injustice, and it really means high-level transformational change, and that's what we need to see as Indigenous peoples. And we've talked about that implementation for each treaty by each treaty territory, and each treaty relationship with the Crown should be looked at nation to nation again. And so that's where we need to take it. And again, that's where on the high level, on the treaty side, the inherent rights side, is what we've talked about, and that's what we're looking for. It's transformational change, and that's what we need to do collectively across this country together. And we're not meant to be poor in our own homelands, and so we need to change that, because we have raised this within the United Nations. They're not just fundamental treaty inherent rights, they're human rights. And dealing with human rights is in the national best interest for all Canadians, and that has to be respected and followed and recognized. And even dealing with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, that always speaks to free, prior, and informed consent as it deals with lands and resources. That's where we need to look and need to go.
No, I just had a comment on terms of the education. And in Saskatchewan, I'll hold up that treaties and inherent rights are taught in every school in Saskatchewan,
right from kindergarten to grade 12. That's a model that every school in Canada should look after and envision, so our children can grow up with peaceful coexistence, mutual respect, and understanding that there are Indigenous peoples. We have our own land, our own laws, our own culture, all different nations. The National Chief spoke about 58 different nations or tribes in this Turtle Island. And to teach that in the schools, and I say this, the myth that Canada was founded on two founding nations, France and Great Britain. Our nations were here, but we say that in a respectful way because we open up our territories to our brothers and sisters to come and work and live in peace together. That should be in every school across Canada. It's happening in our territory, but build upon that because our futures are intertwined together, and finding that collectivity to close that huge socioeconomic gap that exists. And that's where we have to put our minds and hearts together, done regionally, nationally, internationally. And that's where Canada always gets a black eye because it's a rich country, but why is one segment, the First Nation people, so poor? And we got to close that collectively together.
To make it clear, we do need
the relationship with the Crown, with the Queen is always a paramount for us Treaty First Nations people. It was a relationship with the Crown and right of Great Britain. Now with the Patriots from the Constitution 1982, the Crown and right of Canada. So we hold up high that relationship with the Queen, and so to have the Governor General there, and we're working very hard. We're hoping that it comes in the morning, that meeting will be there, and we're hoping that our chiefs, and Chief Spence will be there to meet with the Governor General, and we're hoping at the Delta. So we're hoping that it happens. We're hoping that it happens, and we're going to keep pressing for that because that's very fundamental. That our relationship with the Crown and rebuilding that relationship nation to nation is fundamental and key. So that's important, and we're going to keep pushing for that collectively.